The alarm tore through the night before anyone understood what was falling toward them. At the edge of a quiet desert research post, a bright streak split the dark sky. It moved too fast to be a plane, and too controlled to be a meteor. Every screen inside the control room lit up red at once. Nathan Cole, a young security officer working the night shift, was the first to reach the window. He watched the light bend, slow, and then drop hard into the hills less than 2 miles away. He did not wait for orders. He grabbed his radio, called it in, and was already running for the vehicle bay before the duty officer finished asking what he had seen. Within minutes, 3 trucks rolled out across the dark sand, headlights bouncing over rocks and dry brush. Nathan sat in the lead vehicle beside Colonel Edward Price, a stern man who had spent 20 years preparing for emergencies that never came. Tonight, one had finally arrived. When they reached the crash site, the air still smelled of heat and burnt metal. A strange aircraft, smooth and silver, lay broken across a shallow ravine. It was unlike anything built on Earth. Its surface pulsed faintly with a soft light, like it was still breathing. Nathan was the first to climb toward the wreck. Sparks hissed from a torn seam in the hull. He called out, asking if anyone was inside, though he expected no answer. Then he heard it. A voice, weak, unfamiliar, speaking words that were not any human language, yet somehow felt urgent, like a warning or a cry for help. He pulled a bent panel aside and found her. A young woman lay trapped inside a shattered chamber, her skin catching the moonlight in a way no human skin could. Her clothing was unlike any uniform he had seen, made of a material that shimmered faintly even in the dark. She was bleeding from a wound near her shoulder, her breathing shallow, her eyes struggling to focus on him. Nathan did not think. He tore the last piece of debris away and pulled her free, lifting her out just as a support beam above them gave way and crashed down where she had been lying seconds before. Colonel Price arrived seconds later, weapon raised out of instinct, then lowered it slowly as he saw what Nathan was holding. Not a threat. A survivor. They carried her to the truck. She did not fight them. She only stared at Nathan with wide, frightened eyes, gripping his sleeve the entire ride back to the post, as if letting go might mean losing the only steady thing in a world that had just been torn apart. By the time they reached the medical bay, word had already reached command. Within hours, the outpost that had spent years studying quiet skies for radio signals was suddenly at the center of something far bigger than anyone had trained for. Dr. Grace Whitfield, the post's only physician, worked through the night, stabilizing wounds that did not match anything in her training. The visitor's body healed strangely fast, but her strength was still failing. She needed rest, safety, and time. What she did not need, Colonel Price said grimly the next morning, was 30 different agencies fighting over what to do with her. Within 2 days, secure calls were being made from the outpost to offices far away, in cities most of the staff had only seen on maps. Everyone had an opinion. Some wanted her moved to a secure facility immediately. Some wanted her studied. A few, quietly, wondered if she was dangerous. Nathan said nothing during these calls. He was not high enough in rank to be asked his opinion, and he understood that. But every night, after his shift ended, he found himself walking past the room where she was kept, checking that the guard rotation was steady, checking that she had water, checking that no one had left the lights too bright or too dim. On the 3rd night, she was awake when he came by. She sat up slowly, wincing at the movement, and looked at him with the same wide, careful eyes from the crash site. She said something in her own language, soft and searching, then stopped when she realized he could not understand. Instead, she raised her hand slightly and touched 2 fingers to her own chest, then pointed toward him. Nathan understood. She was asking who he was. He tapped his chest gently. "Nathan," he said. She repeated it slowly, testing the sound. Then she touched her own chest and said a word that took him a moment to catch clearly. "Sarah." It was the first real word exchanged between 2 people who came from different worlds, and somehow, it felt like the beginning of something far larger than either of them understood yet. Over the following days, as reports moved back and forth between offices with no real urgency to make a decision, Sarah remained at the outpost. Colonel Price argued for delay, worried that a hasty transfer could risk her safety, or worse, provoke whoever had caused the crash in the first place. No one yet knew why her ship had gone down. No wreckage of a natural disaster had been found. Just warlike damage along one side of the hull, the kind caused by something firing at her. That detail alone was enough to keep the post's shields up, and its patrols doubled. Nathan was assigned, almost by accident, as her primary guard. It began simply because he was the one who found her, the one she seemed calmest around, and the one willing to sit quietly in a chair outside her door without demanding anything from her. As days passed, the assignment became permanent. He brought her food she was hesitant to try at first, then grew to enjoy. He brought her books with pictures, since words meant nothing to her yet, and watched her study human images with quiet fascination, pointing at things, and waiting for him to say the word aloud. Slowly, painfully, they began to understand each other. She was not just a survivor. She was someone running from something far more dangerous than a crash. He noticed the way she flinched at loud engine sounds, how she checked windows before sitting near them, how her eyes darted toward exits whenever new personnel walked through the halls. Whatever she had escaped, it was not finished with her yet. Nathan reported his concerns to Colonel Price, who nodded grimly, and said the same thought had been forming in his own mind. Whoever had shot down her ship might still be searching for her. That night, as Nathan stood watch outside her door, he found himself staring at the dark horizon beyond the post's fence line, wondering how much time they truly had before the sky lit up again, and this time, not with rescue, but with pursuit. Weeks passed, and the outpost slowly adjusted to a routine no one had expected to live through. Officials from faraway cities kept sending updates instead of decisions, arguing over jurisdiction while Sarah remained tucked away behind reinforced walls and quiet corridors. For Nathan, the days blurred into a rhythm built entirely around her safety, though somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like duty and started feeling like something closer to friendship. Sarah's grasp of English grew faster than anyone expected. She had a sharp mind, quick to notice patterns, quicker to remember a word once she heard it twice. Within a month, she could hold simple conversations, stringing together thoughts that revealed a person far more complex than the frightened, injured stranger they had pulled from the wreckage. She was, Nathan learned slowly, not just a survivor of a crash. She was the daughter of a ruling family, from a world far beyond anything humans had charted, a place with cities built into floating rings above oceans of silver water, and skies that shifted colors with the seasons. She spoke of her home carefully at first, testing how much she trusted him, then more openly, as the weeks passed and trust deepened between them. Her family, she explained one evening as rain tapped softly against the reinforced windows, had been targeted by a rival faction within her own court, a group that believed the old ruling line was too gentle, too slow to expand their reach across the stars. When negotiations failed, they turned to force. Her ship had been fleeing an attack on her home when it was struck and forced to crash on Earth, the nearest world with breathable air. She did not know if her family had survived the attack. She did not know if anyone from her home even knew where she was. Nathan listened without interrupting, understanding for the first time the full weight of what she carried. She was not simply stranded. She was alone, hiding a title she had not chosen, waiting for a war she did not start to find her again. "You did not ask for any of this," he said one night, sitting across from her in the small common room they had begun using. Once trust allowed her more freedom within the post. Sarah studied him for a long moment. "Neither did you," she said, "yet you are still here." It was true. Nathan could have requested reassignment weeks ago. Other guards would have gladly taken the post, especially once whispers began circling that her presence might attract danger. But he had not asked to leave, and if he was honest with himself, he did not want to. There was something about her steadiness, even in fear, that he admired. She did not complain about her circumstances. She adapted, learned, and tried, every single day, to understand a world that made no sense to her. In turn, he found himself trying to understand her world too, asking about her home, her family, the customs she missed, the small things that reminded her of a life she might never return to. Colonel Price noticed the bond forming between them, though he said nothing directly. He simply made sure Nathan remained assigned to her security detail whenever schedules allowed, trusting that whatever kept her calm and cooperative was worth preserving, even if it bent typical protocol. Dr. Whitfield noticed too, in quieter ways. She often found the two of them sitting together during Sarah's recovery sessions, Nathan explaining human customs with patient humor, Sarah correcting his attempts at her language with quiet amusement. It was, Whitfield mentioned once to Price, the only part of this entire situation that felt hopeful instead of urgent. But urgency was never far away. Reports trickled in from outside sources, fragments picked up by listening stations scattered across remote parts of the world. Strange energy signatures, similar to the one recorded during Sarah's crash, had been detected passing through the upper atmosphere twice in the last month. Neither instance came close enough to confirm direct searching, but the pattern was enough to keep Colonel Price awake most nights, reviewing security measures long after the rest of the post had gone quiet. Sarah felt it too. She grew tense whenever new personnel arrived, watching them carefully until she was certain they meant no harm. She began asking Nathan more detailed questions about the post's defenses, not out of distrust, but preparation. She understood, better than anyone, what her pursuers were capable of. One evening, as the sun sank low over the desert hills, she asked Nathan directly if he would run if her enemies ever found her here. He looked at her, surprised by the question. "Would you want me to?" She hesitated. "It would be safer for you." "That's not what I asked." Sarah studied him again, longer this time, as if searching for something behind his words. Finally, she shook her head slowly. "No, I would not want you to run." It was a simple exchange, but it settled something between them that neither had said aloud before. Whatever came next, whatever danger might follow her here, they would face it together, not as guard and charge, but as two people who had somehow, against every likelihood, come to care about each other's survival as much as their own. Still, neither of them knew how soon that promise would be tested. 3 nights later, the listening station picked up another signature, this one closer than any before it, moving in a pattern that suggested a search grid rather than random passage. Colonel Price called an emergency briefing before sunrise, gathering senior staff to review defense protocols that had never been tested against anything beyond training drills. Nathan sat in the back of the briefing room, arms crossed, listening carefully as maps and radar readings were displayed. The pattern was clear enough even to his untrained eye. Something was sweeping the region, methodically, patiently, the way a predator circles before closing in. After the briefing ended, Nathan found Sarah waiting outside the medical wing, arms wrapped around herself despite the mild morning air. She already knew. She could see it in the tightened faces of the staff moving briskly through the halls. "They are close," she said quietly. Nathan did not deny it. "We don't know for certain it's them." "I do," she said. "I know how they search. This is exactly how they found my ship before it crashed." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Then we prepare. Whatever happens, you are not facing this alone." Sarah looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and quiet fear, the same look she wore the night he pulled her from the wreckage weeks earlier. Back then, she had been a stranger, clinging to the only steady thing in a broken world. Now, she reached out and gently took his hand, not out of fear this time, but out of trust. "I believe you," she said. Neither of them said anything more. They simply stood together in the quiet morning light, watching the horizon where, somewhere beyond the hills, danger was drawing steadily closer, unaware yet of how far one ordinary man was willing to go to keep his promise. The warning came just after midnight, sharp and sudden, cutting through the stillness of the outpost like a blade. Every light in the security wing flared red at once. A perimeter sensor had detected movement along the northern ridge, too fast and too coordinated to be an animal, too quiet to be a vehicle. Nathan was on his feet before the second alarm even finished sounding. He grabbed his gear from the locker beside the security office and moved straight for Sarah's quarters, his heart hammering with a mixture of adrenaline and dread he had never fully felt before. Colonel Price was already barking orders through the hallway speakers, directing staff to secure positions, sealing outer doors, activating the post's limited defense systems. It was clear from the tension in his voice that this was not a drill, and it was not something the outpost had ever truly prepared for. Sarah was awake when Nathan reached her room, standing near the window, watching the dark hills beyond the fence line, with an expression Nathan recognized instantly. Not panic, recognition. She had seen this exact kind of silence before, the calm, before her ship had been torn apart in the sky above her home. "They found me," she said quietly, without turning. "We don't know that yet," Nathan replied, though even as he said it, he understood how thin the words sounded. A distant hum answered his doubt. Low, steady, growing louder by the second. It was not the sound of a human aircraft. It was smoother, more controlled, the same tone Sarah had once described when explaining how her enemy's scout ships moved through open sky. Colonel Price's voice crackled over the radio clipped to Nathan's vest. "Unidentified craft entering airspace. 3 miles out and closing fast. All non-essential personnel to shelter. Security teams to defensive positions immediately." Nathan didn't wait for further instructions. He turned to Sarah, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "We need to move. Now." She nodded, any hesitation gone, replaced by the same quiet determination that had carried her through weeks of uncertainty on a world not her own. Together, they moved quickly through the corridor, joining the flow of staff heading toward the reinforced lower levels where the post's emergency shelter waited. But halfway there, the ground shook. An impact somewhere near the outer perimeter sent dust raining down from the ceiling tiles. Emergency lighting flickered, then steadied. Shouts echoed from the security office as Colonel Price redirected teams toward the breach point. Nathan pulled Sarah into a side corridor, shielding her instinctively as another tremor rattled the walls. "They're testing the defenses," he said grimly, trying to find a way in. "They will find one," Sarah said, her voice tight but controlled. "They always do." As if to confirm her words, a second impact struck closer, this time followed by the sound of metal tearing, and alarms shifting from warning tones to urgent, continuous wailing. The eastern gate had been breached. Colonel Price's voice returned over the radio, sharper now, edged with real concern. "All units, hostile forces inside the perimeter. Repeat, hostiles inside the perimeter. Protect the civilian sectors and fall back to secondary defense line." Nathan's grip tightened around Sarah's arm as he guided her down a narrower service hallway, one used mostly for maintenance access, far from the main corridors where security teams were now converging to hold the breach. "There's an escape route through the old supply tunnel," he said quickly. "It leads out past the southern ridge to a secondary vehicle shelter. If we can reach it, we can get you clear of the post before they lock down this area completely." Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Lead the way." They moved fast, weaving through dim corridors lit only by emergency lighting, the distant sound of confrontation growing louder behind them with every passing second. Nathan kept one hand steady on his weapon, the other guiding Sarah through each turn, his senses sharpened by a fear he refused to let control him. They reached the maintenance stairwell just as a group of intruders rounded the corner behind them, moving with the same eerie precision Sarah had described, coordinated, efficient, clearly trained for exactly this kind of pursuit. Nathan didn't hesitate. He pushed Sarah through the stairwell door and sealed it behind them, buying precious seconds as the group outside worked to force it open. "This way," Nathan said, guiding her down the narrow steps into the lower maintenance level, a maze of pipes and machinery that hummed quietly around them, offering both cover and confusion for anyone trying to track their path. They pressed forward through the dim tunnel, Sarah moving quickly despite her earlier injuries, driven by the same survival instinct that had kept her alive since the night her ship first went down. Behind them, the sound of the stairwell door finally giving way echoed through the tunnel, followed by fast, deliberate footsteps. "They're gaining," Sarah whispered. Nathan glanced back, calculating the distance to the tunnel's end, where the supply exit waited, still nearly 200 meters ahead. Too far to outrun a coordinated pursuit, especially with Sarah still recovering her full strength. He made a decision in an instant, one that would define everything that followed. "When we reach the fork ahead," he said quickly, voice low but firm, "you go left toward the exit. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run straight for the vehicle shelter. There's a transport already fueled for emergency evacuation." "What about you?" Sarah asked, her voice catching with sudden understanding of what he intended. "I'll take the right passage," he said. "It loops back toward the main corridor. It'll draw them away from you long enough for you to get clear." "No," she said immediately, gripping his arm. "That passage leads directly toward more of them. You'll be alone." "I know," Nathan said, meeting her eyes with a calm that surprised even himself. "But it's the only way you make it out." Before she could argue further, the sound of pursuit grew unmistakably closer. Boots striking metal flooring with practiced urgency. There was no more time for debate. They reached the fork just as the first of their pursuers emerged from the tunnel behind them, weapon raised, movements sharp and mechanical in their precision. "Go," Nathan said firmly, pushing Sarah toward the left passage. "Now." For one final moment, Sarah's eyes locked with his, filled with a fear that had nothing to do with the enemy closing in, and everything to do with the man standing between her and them. "Nathan." "Go," he repeated, softer this time. "I'll find you." She hesitated only a heartbeat longer before turning and sprinting down the left passage, disappearing into the shadows just as Nathan spun to face the pursuit alone, positioning himself firmly in the center of the right passage, the only barrier now standing between Sarah's escape and the danger following close behind. He drew his weapon, steadied his breathing, and prepared to hold the line for as long as it took. Whatever happened next, he intended to make certain of one thing: she would make it out. The passage narrowed just enough to work in his favor, forcing anyone approaching to come at him one at a time rather than as a wall of coordinated numbers. Nathan positioned himself behind a support column, using the tunnel's uneven lighting to his advantage, waiting until the first pursuer rounded the bend before acting. The confrontation that followed was fast, tense, and disorienting, filled with shouted warnings, and the sharp clatter of movement echoing off metal walls. Nathan held his position with a discipline built from years of training, buying every second he could, aware that each moment he stood firm was another moment carrying Sarah closer to safety. Somewhere beyond the tunnel walls, he could hear the distant sound of an engine starting, the emergency transport roaring to life, exactly where he had told her it would be waiting. She had made it. That knowledge steadied him even as the pressure around him intensified, the pursuit growing more coordinated, more determined to break through his position and continue the chase. Nathan understood clearly that his role now was not to win this confrontation outright, but simply to hold the line long enough for the transport to clear the outer perimeter and vanish into the desert night beyond any hope of tracking. He held his ground with everything he had, refusing to yield the passage, refusing to let his focus break even as the situation around him grew more desperate by the second. Above the post, the distant hum of the enemy craft shifted, circling once, then turning away, as internal signals confirmed their primary target had escaped the perimeter entirely. Whatever coordination existed between the ground pursuit and the craft above, the departure of the ship above signaled a change in their priorities. But the pursuit below did not stop. Nathan remained exactly where he had chosen to stand, in the narrow passage between danger and the woman he had sworn to protect, fully aware of the cost such a stand might carry, yet resolute in the certainty that it was a cost worth paying. Because somewhere beyond the desert hills, Sarah was safe. And for Nathan, in that single unshaken moment, nothing else mattered more than that simple truth. The transport sped through the dark desert roads, tires kicking up clouds of dust behind it, headlights slicing through the night, as Sarah gripped the steering wheel with both hands, her heart pounding louder than the engine roaring beneath her. She had never driven a human vehicle before that night. Nathan had shown her the basics weeks earlier, almost as a joke, teaching her simple controls during a quiet afternoon when danger had felt distant and unlikely. Now those lessons were the only thing standing between her and capture, and she pressed the pedal harder, forcing the vehicle faster down the uneven road, toward the coordinates Nathan had given her days before, a hidden shelter, used only in the most extreme emergencies. Behind her, the outpost was a distant glow swallowed slowly by darkness and distance. She did not look back. She could not afford to. Every second mattered. Every mile between her and the tunnel where she had left Nathan standing alone mattered more than she was willing to admit to herself. She told herself he would follow. He would find a way out, just as he promised, and they would meet again at the shelter exactly as planned. She held on to that thought the entire drive, gripping it as tightly as the wheel in her hands, refusing to let doubt take root. When she finally reached the shelter, hidden beneath a rocky outcrop miles from the outpost, She brought the vehicle to a hard stop and sat there for a long moment, breathing heavily, waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The radio Nathan had given her remained silent except for distant static, the kind that meant either a damaged signal or something far worse. She refused to consider the second possibility. By dawn, when Colonel Price's convoy finally arrived at the shelter, following the emergency signal Nathan had activated before their separation, Sarah was already standing outside, scanning the horizon with an intensity that made even hardened soldiers pause. Colonel Price stepped out of the lead vehicle, his expression carrying the same grim weight it always did during difficult moments. But this time, there was something heavier behind his eyes. "Where is he?" Sarah asked immediately, her voice steady despite the fear tightening every word. Price hesitated only a moment before answering. "We found him at the tunnel's edge. He held them back long enough for reinforcements to reach the breach and force their retreat." Relief flooded through her chest, quick and overwhelming. "Then he's alive," Price's silence answered before his words did. "He held the line, Sarah," he said quietly, "longer than anyone should have been able to. But the injuries he sustained doing it were too severe. Dr. Whitfield did everything possible. It wasn't enough." The world around Sarah seemed to still completely, every sound fading into a distant hum, every thought scattering into fragments too painful to hold together. She had heard the words clearly, understood their meaning without question, yet some part of her refused to accept them, standing frozen in the pale morning light, as the full weight of loss settled over her like a collapsing sky. Nathan had told her he would find her. He had promised. But promises, she now understood with devastating clarity, were not always kept, no matter how much courage stood behind them. She was brought back to the outpost in silence, the drive back feeling infinitely longer than the desperate escape hours earlier. When she arrived, the halls that once felt like a strange, unfamiliar refuge now felt hollow, every corner holding a memory of a man who would never walk through them again. Dr. Whitfield met her quietly near the medical wing, her eyes red-rimmed from a night that had clearly taken its own toll. She said little, offering only a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder, before stepping aside to let her enter the small room where Nathan's belongings had been carefully gathered. Sarah stood there for a long time, staring at the modest collection of items that represented an entire life, given without hesitation, for someone he had known only a few short months. A worn jacket, a small notebook filled with careful notes about her language and customs, a photograph of his family, taken years before duty had carried him to this remote post. She picked up the notebook gently, flipping through pages filled with his handwriting, phrases he had practiced in her language, small drawings meant to help him remember unfamiliar words, notes about things she liked, things that made her laugh, things that made the long days at the outpost feel less like exile and more like a life worth living. He had learned her world not because duty required it, but because he wanted to understand her. And in return, she realized now with painful clarity, she had learned to depend on his steady presence, in ways she had never expected to depend on anyone again, after losing so much already. The following days passed in a blur of quiet arrangements. Colonel Price, against significant resistance from distant officials still arguing over jurisdiction and procedure, insisted on a proper service for Nathan, one that honored the sacrifice he had made, regardless of how unconventional the circumstances surrounding it were. Sarah attended every part of it, standing silently at the edge of the gathered staff, her expression carefully composed, despite the storm of grief building steadily beneath the surface. She said nothing during the service itself, unsure if her voice would hold steady enough to speak the words gathering in her chest. But that night, alone beside the quiet stretch of desert where he had been laid to rest, she finally allowed herself to speak freely, her voice carrying softly into the night air. She told him about her home, the floating cities he had never gotten the chance to see. She told him about her family, the ones she still did not know had survived the attack that started this entire journey. She told him, finally, what she had never found the courage to say while he was still there to hear it. That somewhere between the terror of that first night and the quiet mornings that followed, she had come to care for him in a way she had never expected to feel for anyone, let alone someone from a world entirely different from her own. And that she intended, no matter what challenges awaited her beyond this moment, to make certain his sacrifice was never forgotten, not by her, and not by the people she would one day return to lead. The wind shifted softly around her as she spoke, carrying her words out across the quiet desert, the same desert that had first brought them together beneath a falling sky months earlier. She stood there long after the words ended, watching the stars above, wondering which distant point of light might one day guide her home, and knowing, with absolute certainty, that whatever future awaited her there, it would always carry the memory of the man who gave everything to make certain she survived long enough to see it. 3 years passed before Sarah set foot on her homeworld again. The floating cities greeted her exactly as she remembered them, rings of silver and glass suspended gracefully above oceans that shimmered beneath a sky shifting slowly through shades of violet and gold. Yet nothing about her return felt as she once imagined it would. Her family had survived the attack that started her journey, though barely. The rival faction responsible for the assault had been defeated in the months following her disappearance, their leadership scattered or captured by loyalists who never stopped believing she would return. Her mother, weakened by the conflict but alive, stepped down from the throne not long after Sarah's arrival, insisting the line continue through her daughter rather than risk further instability. Sarah accepted the responsibility not with ambition, but with quiet resolve, understanding fully the weight such a role carried. She had already learned, in the harshest way possible, what true sacrifice looked like. She intended to lead with that lesson carried firmly in her heart. Her coronation was a grand affair, filled with ceremony and tradition stretching back generations, yet throughout the entire event, one thought remained steady beneath the surface of every smile and formal gesture she offered the gathered crowds. Nathan should have been there to see it. In the months that followed her ascension to the throne, Sarah worked tirelessly to stabilize her world, rebuilding trust among divided factions, restoring order to systems shaken by conflict. Her advisors quickly learned that while she listened carefully to counsel, she made her own decisions with unwavering clarity, especially when those decisions touched anything related to Earth. It was during one such council meeting, nearly a year into her reign, that she first raised the subject that would define much of her legacy in the years to come. "I want a memorial built," she said simply, addressing her gathered advisors with the same calm authority she carried into every difficult conversation. "On Earth, at the site where Nathan Cole is buried." The response was immediate and predictable. Several advisors exchanged uncertain glances, clearly searching for a polite way to explain why such a request carried little political value. One finally spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Your Majesty, with respect, honoring a single human soldier offers no strategic benefit to our people. Our resources would be better spent strengthening alliances with—" "He is not a strategic decision," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "He is the reason I am alive to make decisions at all." The room fell silent. She continued, her tone softening slightly, though the resolve behind it never wavered. "There will be no negotiation on this matter. The memorial will be built, and it will stand as long as our people exist to maintain it." No one challenged her further. Construction began within the month, a joint effort between her people's engineers and the small research outpost that had once sheltered her during the darkest period of her life. Colonel Price, now retired from active duty, but still deeply connected to the events of that fateful year, oversaw the project from the human side, ensuring every detail honored the man he had once commanded. The memorial itself was simple by design, a request Sarah insisted upon personally. A quiet garden surrounding a modest stone marker, engraved not with grand titles or elaborate tributes, but with a single line she had written herself during the long nights following his loss. "He gave everything so another could live. Let that be remembered longer than his name." Beneath it, engraved separately, his name remained clear and permanent, exactly as she promised it always would. Sarah visited the memorial whenever her responsibilities allowed, often making the long journey personally, rather than sending representatives in her place. She rarely announced these visits publicly, preferring instead the quiet solitude of standing beside his resting place without ceremony or attention, simply speaking softly to him about the events of her life since their final goodbye. She told him about the challenges of leadership, the small victories and larger struggles that came with guiding a people through recovery. She told him about the ongoing friendship maintained between her world and the small human outpost that had once given her shelter, a bond neither government fully understood, but neither dared to dismiss either. She told him, more than anything, that the values he showed her during those uncertain months, steadiness, selflessness, quiet courage without need for recognition, had shaped the kind of leader she strove every day to become. Years passed. The memorial garden grew lush and full, tended carefully by both human staff and occasional visitors from her world, who made the long journey specifically to see the place where such an unlikely bond had once formed. Children born long after the events themselves grew up hearing the story as something between history and legend, a tale of an ordinary man who gave everything to protect someone from an entirely different world. Sarah made certain the story was recorded accurately in her people's royal archive, refusing to allow embellishment or exaggeration to distort what had actually happened. She wanted future generations to understand the truth clearly, that heroism did not require grand titles or extraordinary abilities, only the willingness to stand firm when everything depended on it. During one of her later visits to the memorial, now years into her reign, a young officer from her personal guard accompanied her for the first time, curious about the significance of the distant human world his queen visited so faithfully. "Your Majesty," he asked quietly, as they stood together before the modest stone marker, "why does this place matter so much, even after all this time?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering, her eyes settling on the engraved name in front of her. "Because he never asked to be remembered," she said softly. "He simply did what needed to be done, without hesitation, without expectation of reward. People like that are rare, regardless of what world they come from. If I do not remember him, who will?" The young officer said nothing further, understanding clearly the weight behind her words. As the years continued forward, Sarah's reign became known not just for the stability she restored to her people, but for the quiet compassion she carried into every decision she made, a trait many close to her privately attributed to the lessons learned during her time on Earth. She never remarried, despite pressure from advisors eager to secure alliances through marriage. She never publicly explained why, though those closest to her understood well enough without needing an explanation. On the anniversary of Nathan's passing each year, without fail, Sarah made the long journey back to the quiet desert memorial, standing alone beneath the same wide sky that had first brought them together so many years before. She would stay for hours sometimes, simply sitting quietly beside the marker, watching the stars begin to appear as evening settled over the desert. It was, she often said privately, the only place in the galaxy where she still felt like the frightened, grateful stranger he had once pulled gently from a burning wreck, rather than the queen countless worlds now looked to for guidance. In her final years, long after her own reign passed to the next generation, Sarah requested one final addition to the memorial before her own passing, an addition her successors carried out exactly as instructed. A second stone, smaller than the first, placed quietly beside it, bearing no name, only a simple inscription meant to explain, for anyone who ever wondered, why an entire civilization once paused to honor a single, ordinary soldier from a distant, unremarkable world. "Some debts," it read, "are too great to ever be fully repaid. The least we can do is refuse to forget them." Long after Sarah herself was gone, the memorial remained, tended carefully across generations, visited quietly by travelers from both worlds, who came simply to stand for a moment beside the resting place of a man whose courage once changed the course of an entire civilization's future. And those centuries eventually passed, carrying with them countless changes across both worlds. One truth remained exactly as Sarah had insisted it always would. His name was never forgotten.